and welcome to the Knowing Show. I am your host, Christine Marie. There's so many different facets that make up a human being. There's our intellect, our mind, the way that we interpret the world, and how we can take something, see something, and experience it in a completely different way than those around us. And that lends to the next part of what makes us us is our emotions and the way that we actually feel. How what we see translates into kind of our emotional center, what so many call our soul. And that really engages the right hemisphere of the brain. The intellect, so much so, is the left hemisphere of the brain. The emotions are the right. And then we've got our spirit. And that, I like to think of it as kind of the pathway to God, the ability to hear his voice, the ability to know something that we otherwise would have never come to know by our own intellect alone. And then the next is our physical body. Our physical body actually is such a great conduit of kind of like access to what's going on in this physical world. And so we've got our spirit that connects us kind of to the supernatural, to the divine, and then we've got our body that is the connector and the receptor to the physical world. And so when we think about mind, body, soul, spirit, every single one of those is the amalgamation of what makes you and me and you. But when we go into work and we only are bringing our intellect, we're actually shutting off so many core parts of us. Or when we show up in relationship and we're not bringing the intellect, or maybe we're even showing up to a religious setting, but we're not bringing our mind, or we're not bringing even our physical body. You know, for those of you who have grown up in kind of a spiritual environment, or even been in a spiritual environment, there's something where when your spirit starts to encounter something divine, your body wants to respond. There's something around dancing or singing, and you feel this in terms of emotions as well. When you love somebody, you want to embrace them. And so when we are showing up on LinkedIn, when we're showing up in our world of profession, let's say, how much are we actually bringing our mind, body, soul, spirit, or are we shutting off parts of ourselves and compartmentalizing elements of who we are, and thus never actually being integrated and being a full, whole human being? And so the reason why this show exists, the Knowing Show, is to know every single one of those parts and to allow for, foster, and facilitate a holistic, honestly, full-fledged life, an experiential life. I felt like I lived asleep for 28 years of my life until I was kind of woken awake by my own desire to face what was devastating for me. And here's the thing that's so interesting is that just because we go through a time of brokenness or devastation, that does not mean we will automatically be changed by it or better for it. It's a decision we have to make. We have to be willing to allow for the parts that are broken around us to do their job, which is breaking open. You know, if we're holding tightly to the pieces that are trying to be broken open, and it's kind of like, let's say, broken pottery where it's starting to break apart and starting to come off, or like a dead tree and the limb is starting to break and you're sitting there holding the limb up, trying to keep it from falling. Well, actually, maybe it's for the health of the tree that the limb comes off, and that which is dead goes and gets burned up, and there's erosion there. And even corrosion, you know, over time, these parts of us, when they are left unattended, they actually get corroded. You know, things start to build up and resentment starts to grow and anger starts to fester. And so if we're not doing an ongoing analysis of the state of our mind, our soul, our spirit, our physical body, if we're not doing an ongoing analysis, considering how am I doing, how am I feeling, what am I thinking, so much of what we talk about on the show is the act of taking a thought and kind of pulling it out and looking at it and being curious and considering, is this thought something that is giving me life, or is it actually taking away life from me? We go through every single day a workbook called A Course in Miracles, and there's 365 lessons. And one of the lessons that it talks about early on in our work, we're on day 161 right now. So I think it was like day 16. It posited a thought and premise, which is no thought is neutral. Every single thought has power to it, and it either brings life or it detracts from us. So on the Knowing Show, and just as we're talking together here as a community on YouTube, for those of you who are joining on LinkedIn or Facebook, feel free to hop over and join us here. The one of the things that we really talk about here on the show is taking every thought, taking it captive, like not just thinking and operating at a subconscious level, but being aware, being awake to what is going on inside of me. What am I thinking about? Because those thoughts yield results. Every single thought is almost like we're making an emotional, intellectual deposit into a bank. And so with every thought, there's a concept that I really love. It says, where you place your attention is where you place your energy. So if I am thinking something and I start placing my attention on it, you guys know what I mean by this. We can have a thought race through our mind and we can put our attention to it and then start putting our energy towards it. It's like something's racing by and we're like, wait a second, we catch it. And we're like, is this something that I want to dwell on? Is this something that's good for me? And so we analyze the thought and we consider, is this something that's going to help me get to where I want to get to? And then the same thing goes for an emotion. We capture the emotion, we take a hold of it, we become aware of it. Oh, I didn't even know I was feeling this way. Then we take the emotion, we kind of hold it out and we analyze it with being curious. This is really interesting. Why am I feeling this way? And so with curiosity, we can examine our thoughts, our emotions, even patterns and ways of being that maybe have become so normal to us. But when we take the time to consider, why am I operating this way? We realize, oh my gosh, that serves me in no way. Or somebody, this is actually a funny example. I was with somebody and they took the plate of butter. There was butter on a plate and they put the butter in the microwave. And I was like, why'd you do that? Like, that's strange. And so I asked them, why'd you put the plate of butter in the microwave? And they were like, oh, to protect it from the cats. And as they said that, they kind of slowed down and were like, oh, we didn't have any cats. But they were on such a program from in being a child where they would put the plate of butter in the microwave to protect it from the cats that was just their default. So we have all these default behaviors, all these default even thought processes that have been developed because of our experiences, often in childhood or as a young adult, that now just run on default, run on autopilot, that we're not even aware of. And so as we talk about these core intelligences, our intellectual intelligence, emotional intelligence, yes, spiritual intelligence and physical intelligence, every single one holds data. Every single one has something to share. And the very first step of emotional intelligence specifically is to become aware of, and then to understand, and then to convey and to control one's own emotions. And then on the other side of that, in the same definition, it says, and to engage interpersonally with wisdom and with empathy. So the very first step of emotional intelligence is the ability to be even aware of what's going on inside of us. What am I thinking about? What am I feeling? What's going on inside of me? Because only then, once we become aware of it, can we then start to control it. And who knows, maybe we want to change it. Maybe we don't want to stay depressed. Maybe we don't want to stay angry. But until we're conscious of what's going on inside of us, we're never going to be able to see real change in terms of the external. I had this thought the other day that just got me so giddy, and a friend of mine was like, that's not a cool idea. But I thought it was so cool. I was thinking about how we talk about the human intelligence a lot on the show. And then I was like, oh my gosh, it's the internal intelligence. It is our internal knowing, and it's like our internal operating system. Y'all, I've got my hands in a couple businesses, and a lot of what we look at for other businesses is their operating system, their internal operating system. What is broken in your business that is fundamentally preventing your growth? The exact same question goes for you and me in regards to our internal operating system. What is the internal gaps from where we are today, from where we want to get to in order to achieve what we're called to do, our mission, the thing that brings us joy? Like where is there the gap? You know, there's a book that I love. It's called The Gap and the Gain. And it talks a lot about taking a stance today and looking back at where you've come and really focusing on the gain and effectively operating from a place of gratitude. I believe that gratitude should actually be kind of the powering source in terms of giving us energy and like the gasoline in the tank. but we still need to know the gaps. We still need to know the reality of what are we contending with? What are we starting with? I got coached by Dr. Jeff Spencer. He used to work with great athletes across the world. And he really helped me realize that the number one most important thing and the starting point of any type of growth is to realize, where are we starting from? What is our baseline? Am I starting in far left field? Am I starting in right field? Am I starting in center field? Or am I starting at home plate? Because until we know the position of our lives, we can't actually start making real change towards any real future destination, because we don't even know where we're starting from. So getting clear on our baseline, that's another thing that we do with businesses too, is, okay, well, what are the baseline metrics? What's the status quo today? And now we can start incrementally measuring results and impact. But we have to have a start. We have to have a fundamental, it's like a control group. You can't test anything unless you've got a control group. So we've got to start with a baseline. We have to know, where am I today? And that comes from doing an audit of that internal intelligence, that internal operating system. What do you believe? What and how are you operating your life? And those beliefs are actually really important. And I want to lean into that for just a second, because, we mentioned how a lot of our default programs, that person who put the plate of butter in the microwave, a lot of those default programs, they're there for a really good reason. They're there not just because of an experience that we had, but that experience formed a belief, usually again in childhood, but even in early adulthood. It formed a belief about ourselves, about the world, about God, about others. And now we've been operating from that belief system. And so at the very core, at the very nucleus, like if you were going to kind of take the onion and peel it multiple layers, like at the very external, you see the way people show up in relationships, the way they show up at work. But then you take it one layer back, and then you kind of start looking at their internal operating system. And then you start peeling layer after layer after layer, and you start seeing, oh, that behavior is because of a belief. And that belief is because of an experience that they had. And you start kind of working your way backwards, and it's like, oh, it all makes so much sense. How we show up externally is a result of our internal state. And so on the Knowing Show, we talk about how do we close the gap from where we want to get to where we are today. And so we're powered by the gain, a lot of gratitude, because frankly, a lot of people today are doing so much better than their childhood environment. We might still be really far from who we want to be, but we should never forget to feel grateful. I mean, gratitude really is the antidote. I was actually thinking about that this morning. Gratitude really is oxygen. It's like life. I'm choosing joy. I'm choosing to focus on that which is good. I'm not ignoring what's bad in my life, but I am choosing to allow for that which is good and beautiful and wholesome. The fact that there is sunshine coming through my window right now, I'm allowing that to be the fuel to change the things that I don't like, to examine that which is negative. So it's effectively, there's this analogy. I was sitting in the back of the room once at an event for Amazon. My partner and I were putting it on. She did the event. I did all of the copy and communications and script writing. And so I was sitting in the back of the room, and I was watching this amazing speaker. I had never heard her before. Her name was Lisa Nichols. And she held a glass in her hand, and she held a pitcher in the other. And beneath was just like this clear bowl. And she starts pouring water into the glass, and she holds it up, and she says, "So many of you will give from a half full cup." And then she pours and pours and pours, and then it fills all the way up to the top. And then she says, "Others of you will give from a full cup." And then she continues to pour, and the water spills into the basin below. And then she holds up the cup, and she says, "Y'all, this cup, the contents within this glass are all for you. The basin, your overflow, is for everybody else." Y'all, so much of the reason why we live and relationships are really struggling and relationships are really damaging. I'm looking around, and there's so much divorce. There's so many broken partnerships, not even just romantically, but also in business. People cannot get beyond their own pain and their own past. We talked about this at the beginning, where there's no neutral thought. A thought either gives life or it takes away. And so many people are meditating on things that are meditating by literally feeding these thoughts that are really negative about people, about themselves, because of the past, and they've never dealt with the experience. And because they've never dealt with the experience, their belief system is really corroded. And then the way that they show up in the world is really damaging to themselves and to others. So this concept of going and filling up your cup, looking at our internal operating system, looking at that inner intelligence, and seeing, man, where am I off? What do I really actually love? What's really in alignment? All allows for us to then give from this place of overflow that is so powerful. It means, man, when we've got a real overflow, it means that we can go into a room. We can go into, even just yesterday at the airport, I went and I met two friends. One woman had just flown from Ireland to visit her darling for 9 weeks. And I was like, well, geez, you won't know anybody else. Let's all be friends. And so I started this little WhatsApp group called Flight Friends. And I had a full cup though. So guys, I don't always have that, and I know you don't either. So much of the time it's just kind of like this battle of like, okay, where am I going to give this investment of my time, investment of my energy, investment of my intention, and which area is going to yield the greatest return? Which areas of investing my time, attention, energy is going to allow for overflow? There are certain people that you spend time with them and it actually leaves you more depleted than before. Whereas other people, you'll spend time around them and man, you've actually got more overflow. You've got more to give because they gave you so much. And it was mutually beneficial. And so we've got those people. We also have those activities. I love asking people, what brings joy to you? What is life giving to you? Because so much of the time we're just doing the day to day. We wake up just before our alarm goes, we wake up just before we have to leave, right when our alarm goes off. We're rushing out the door. We're going to our work. We come back. We sit in front of the TV. And there's no margin. There's no margin to feed our soul in addition to feeding our body and feeding our mind and feeding our spirit. And so if we want to be able to have an overflow from which to give, where, man, we've got capacity. If people do something we don't like, we're not instantly triggered. We actually have buffer, because that overflow, I think of it as, this is interesting. I've never thought of this analogy before. It's kind of like you've got the nucleus of your cup, your full cup, and then you've got this initial concentric circle that's the overflow, and it's buffer for you from the external world, so that if there's pressure coming in from a side or a corner, you've got the overflow that makes you a little bit less volatile. And so if we don't have overflow, that means when people say something or do something that's hurtful, we instantly get triggered. The reality is that somebody poking or prying or doing something that offends us, that offense was in us already. You can't be triggered unless that was in you to begin with. So the contents of our cup are so important to consider, in addition to, okay, yes, let's have overflow, but what even are the contents in your cup? Are you filled up with joy? Are you filled up with peace? Are you filled up with an ability to keep going and be self-motivated because you believe in the way that you're living your life? You have a why. You have something more than yourself to live for. I think one of the greatest devastations perhaps is that we don't have a high enough aim. We don't have a high enough vision for our lives, a great enough dream. I went back to Martin Luther a couple weeks ago and just was really thinking about what an incredible human who saw a different world than the one we exist in. And for so many of us, we don't view life that way. We're not actually operating at that ability to see and vision something other than that which is right in front of us, because we're so clouded. And it's not even that we're clouded by what's in front of us. We're clouded by the past. We're clouded from being able to see the reality of right here, right now, much more so the future, because we're carrying all that past pain with us. And it becomes like a film over our eyes and an inability to move forward. So when we talk about how to actually conquer hate and how to conquer fear, it's a choice in so many ways. It's a choice to move away from those old patterns, those old belief systems. But we have to know what they are in order to make a real change. And I actually saw this really keenly in my own life, where I didn't want to show up in my former relationship in, honestly, like how my parents were. I love my parents to death. They're so wonderful, and I couldn't respect people more. So I want to caveat it with that. I love them so much, and I didn't want to do my relationship the way that my parents did. My mom stayed at home. I wanted to work, at least for now. I didn't have any kids. And so I fundamentally needed to have a different relationship, but I didn't have a target in mind to aim for. And so what that did was that I ended up, rather than doing a 180 change, I'm starting, what's my baseline, right? Where are we starting from? I was starting from a vision and a model for me that I knew I didn't want to repeat or replicate. But because I didn't have a new target, I didn't have a vision for who I did want to be and how I did want to be, how did I want to exist in that relationship. And so what I ended up doing was I ended up doing just like a whole big 360. I ended up repeating exactly the behaviors and habits and patterns I never wanted to be like in the first place. So we have to set a new vision and a new target to do a lateral 180 change rather than a 360 repeating history. I think, when we look at, this is interesting, and I've never thought about it this way. So I'd love to hear your perspective. When we think about, in America, because I live in the States, when I think about our forefathers who came to found, America, they had a vision of what they did not want to become, but they also had a vision of, okay, this is who I do want to be. We want to be free. We don't want to have a king. We don't want that kind of society setup where we've got a king and we have to operate in submission. And so we have to know not just what we don't like, but we have to know what are we moving towards, because we will inevitably do that which we know. So if we only know the bad habits and we only know the things that we don't want, we're going to start to do that and repeat those behaviors. So if we only know hate, or we only know anger and those kind of more negative emotions, we actually need to learn the new ones, like our new targets. There's a book called Letting Go by David Hawkins that honestly has probably made one of the biggest impacts in my entire life. I have a couple that have just been cornerstones for me. And this book really, really helped me understand, it brought a very logical frame to emotions, because a lot of times people will look at emotions as weakness. I did for a very long time. And so he brings a very logical structure to emotions, and effectively he assigns emotions to numerical value. And so emotions, at 20 are shame. Emotion at 50 is grief. Emotion at the level of 150 is pride. And then at level 200, now we actually start cresting into kind of more of the positive emotions. Now we're getting to 200. And then joy is 400 and peace is 600. And you just kind of keep going up. But we have to know, what is the new target? We have to know, what am I moving away from? But what is the new target I am moving towards? And we have to know both of those. So if we say, okay, well, I want to move away from this negative emotion and move to a positive one. Well, okay, who models that? Who does that well? Because, okay, now let's just take that. Okay, I want to move to a better emotion or move to a different way of existing, let's say. Learn a new habit, whatever it is. You want to move from A to B. So B, not just saying, okay, I want to move to that point, but finding people who model that behavior, who model that emotion, who model even that type of existence. Like, I actually sat down and I did this whole study at Christmas time. I've done some study on, okay, the most successful people in the world, how do they exist? And it's very intellectually based, but it's also the way that they work their body. Like, what are the physical habits of waking up early? What do they eat? How do they sleep? All of those kind of biological traits and qualities, as well as the intellectual qualities. They read. They're constantly pursuing new information. But at Christmas time, I did a study and I was like, okay, well, I actually want to be more like Christ. So I studied the habits of Christ and identified some really core themes in the way Christ lived and operated in the world, whether you believe it was an allegory or it really happened. I know, Giraffe Dude, I've called my maintenance to fix it. I already took out 2 of my batteries from my smoke alarm. I'm seeing these comments come in, and it's still beeping. I didn't know it could operate without a battery, but it's plugged into the wall, so I guess it still has some power. Broken Blister says ceiling birds. I know. That's so funny. So we need to have a clarified target. Where are we going? Who and what does it actually look like to operate and live in accordance with our own ideal? And once we start creating that ideal, now we can actually start making the incremental changes to get there. But we have to know, where are we starting from and where are we going? And so with that, I am actually going to read today's lesson. You know what I realized? Okay, yes, lesson 160. What's today's lesson? Is it 161? Let me see. I'm on my phone right now, so let me just make sure that I'm going to read the right lesson. Here we go. Yep, 161. Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure. All right, so lesson 161, give me your blessing. No, I almost canceled our stream. Okay, here we go. All right, lesson 161, give me your blessing, Holy Son of God. You know what, y'all, I gotta tell you, these lessons are becoming really, really intense. So I started reading A Course in Miracles at the beginning of this year, frankly, just for me. Like, I wanted to grow, and I really wanted to strengthen kind of my own growth in this way. So A Course in Miracles, I like to think of it as kind of going to like the mental and spiritual gym. And it's really digging deep into relearning new ways of thinking. So for example, one of the things that it talked about very, very early on that was very meaningful for me was the fact that my phone's about to die. But early on, it was the fact that, no thought is neutral. So that doesn't necessarily have much to do about spirituality, but it has a lot to do about the intellect. And so I like to think of it as kind of going into the arena for either one of those purposes, spiritually and intellectually. And it touches on, the emotions as well. So as we've been progressing through A Course in Miracles, it's been getting more and more dense. And even yesterday I was reading it and I was like, oof, this is a lot. And so I would love to hear if you guys would be interested in continuing to hear that and receive it. Or if we just get on and we have these conversations, because I really love seeing you guys. Robin Hood's good to see you. Thanks for joining. American Redneck, I'm glad you're here. JC, I'm a fly on the wall. I'm glad you're here. Come be a fly. D. Craig's son, good to see you. I am I actually need to hop off because my phone is dying. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually not going to read through today's lesson. And yeah, I think that this was it. This is good. Sometimes we just gotta go with how it's happening. Fabian, good to see you. I'm glad you're here, my friend. Y'all, thank you so much for joining today. I'm gonna be back on with kind of the regular program. I might even get on later tonight and do this lesson and read it still, just because my phone is dying and my computer is breaking. So I'll probably get back on later just before I go to bed and do our lesson for the day. But I will be back on tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern. Rob, I just saw your comment. So I'll come back on. I'm going to hook up my computer and I'll come back on later tonight and I'll go ahead and schedule this out. So thank you all so much for joining. Any one of us who are willing to do the work, to listen and to go inward and to allow for the truth and the reality of what we see to be known. We don't have to. We can suppress our emotions. We can suppress what's going on in our past that we don't like. But it is really, really amazing, this opportunity, this choice that we have to know, who am I and who was I created to be, and what's happened in my life that's preventing me from being able to walk in the fullness of that, the fullness of our identity. And I am willing to do the work to undo, to create something new. Once we look inward, once we come awake, and once we know, Now we get to make the choice, an intentional choice about how we're going to live the rest of our lives. And now actually we're without excuse because now we're awake. Now we know. Now we've been given the opportunity. And man, maybe never squander it. You know, life is so worth living and life is so worth experiencing it to the fullness. This past weekend, I went to literally the water park and was sliding down all the rides. And it was so much fun. Like, I want to live an experiential life. And I hope all of us want to do that because there's so much good and so much to experience. And there's so much work to do. Like, there's so much good, wholesome work. You know, I was just at a conference. I was in Chicago for 24 hours, Monday into Tuesday, and I was with the lesson. I just saw your comment. You said Tropic said I'm on lesson 162. So I said lesson because I read your chat. But I was attending an industry event it was the #1 association for cleaners around the U.S. And these people are working so incredibly hard. And so, y'all, there's good work for us to do, and there's meaning to be found, because if we're doing what we're called to do and we're doing what we were created for, and this is the thing, once we start living awake, now we can remove ourselves from just the seat of the creator or from the seat of the consumer to become a creator. And so moving into that place is it's just the greatest privilege. So maybe never squander that privilege to create. I'm just looking here, Broken Blister. You know, I would love, I hope you have a wonderful night, Broken Blister. You know, I just saw your comment, and it's interesting, y'all, the things that we say, the things that we write to hold power, they really, really do. And so we were talking about what's coming out of us, and if it's hate coming out, that's kind of the premise of tonight. And if that's coming out of us, you know, what is in us? If the negativity and the hurtful words, and if we actually really care for a person over here, and we really are caring, we're really operating from a place of love, we cannot help but offer that same kind of care and love to someone else over here. Because if they're our brother and sister, then this person is too. And if this person over here is triggering us, then it probably means that there's something inside of us that needs to be dealt with, maybe even healed from. And that's why we go inward and we look with curiosity, because we don't have time for you know, comments that we've seen here in the chat tonight. We don't have time for that. There's so much, there's such a greater world out there. There's so much more opportunity to love. So let's not squander it. Let's not waste another moment. So have a wonderful evening. I will probably be back on later tonight and take a look at or not take a look, but read the lesson. Tommy Schaefer, I'm so glad to see you. I saw your name pop up here. Have a wonderful evening, y'all. I'll see you tonight, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific. Have